The views expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect those of this station.
Welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan, a WBKB News public affairs program. Insights deals with the issues affecting those in the community, as well as Northeast Michigan and the state. And now, Insights into Northeast Michigan.
Welcome to Insights. I'm your host, Star Connor. Did you know that despite the hundreds of shipwrecks that we found in Lake Huron, there are more to be discovered? That's why our very own Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary are back in the waters to find more. So I'm actually standing here with John Bright, research coordinator for this phase. I wanted to talk about phase 3, but before we talk about that, there was a phase 1 and a phase 2. So take me back to where it all began.
It all began at phase 1. We're doing a grant project funded by NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration and Research that is using remote technologies, so automated technologies, to explore unexplored areas within the sanctuary. Within phase 1, we partnered with NOAA's Remote Sensing Division and then a nonprofit called Oceans Unmanned to use unmanned aerial systems, so UAS aircraft or drones, to explore shallow water areas. We did that back in April. The idea being that the water is so clear at that time of the season that you can essentially look through the water and see directly to the lake floor. So we deployed the UAS systems over those shallow water areas, mapped them, mosaicked the resulting photographic imagery to create a complete bottom map of the lake floor, and then from that map we can zoom in and look at individual areas where there are historic shipwreck remains along the bottom, and we can take measurements on those, we can characterize the results, and it gives us a really efficient way to look at those areas that are usually not the kind of place you would want to take a large research vessel such as Storm or even a small boat. With those big shallow water stretches would be dangerous for the vessel. It is not efficient to deploy the more traditional types of bottom mapping technologies like sonar in super shallow water. So we thought if you can map it from the air, it eliminates all of the dangers and complexities of trying to get a vessel into those areas, but you get the same result, which is a continuous image of the bottom of the lake. So that was phase 1. In phase 2, we sort of shifted focus entirely. Instead of looking at shallow water areas, we went to really deep areas, unexplored parts of the lake bottom off of Presqu'Île in what was the historic shipping lanes. We partnered then with the University of Delaware. They brought a type of sonar system that does a couple of different sonar scanning missions at the same time. So it does bottom mapping where it measures depths and what we would call bathymetry, and it also does a sort of a side scan function where it broadcasts sound waves that cast shadows on anything that's sticking up off the bottom. And the combination of those two types of sonar gives us the ability to very quickly map large areas. So we see a very wide view of the bottom, but the other side of that coin is that when we see those wide areas of the bottom at one time, we don't see any of the individual areas within that in great detail. So we run over and explore these large tracts of the lake floor, but within that information, we only get these really small, targets. We don't know if those are rocks. We don't know if they could be shipwreck sites. We run over known shipwreck sites so that we can sort of calibrate what we would see in the data when we run over unknown sites, or when we're exploring new areas, we have an idea of what a shipwreck would appear like in the data set, so that we then review those data sets, identify a list of areas of interest that we go back and examine in greater detail later. So in the course of that phase, we did almost 100 square miles of lake floor over 6 days out on the RV Laurentian. We were 24-hour operations, so we would scan 24 hours a day, weather permitting. We have watches that would rotate through, so you would work for 6 hours on, then 6 hours off, then 6 hours back on, then 6 hours off, day after day after day. We got hundreds and hundreds of gigabytes of data of those different types of sonar scanning types that then have to be processed and reviewed. So we did that in phase 2, and now in phase 3 we're going back with Michigan Technological University in an autonomous underwater vehicle. That underwater vehicle gives us the opposite of the University of Delaware sonar view. So the Delaware sonar was wide areas with low resolution in any given spot. The Michigan Technological University's AUV looks at very narrow areas but with much higher resolution. And so we do a similar thing there that we did previously, which is we use known sites to calibrate the system to make sure that we can image targets properly, and then from that we go out and explore those areas in the lake that we think might have shipwrecks in them based on our interpretation of the previous phase data.
Right. Now, why are there 4 phases?
So the idea with the grant project was to go through all of the parts of a complete archaeological survey in as short of a time span as possible. So you go from that wide area regional survey where you develop targets, then from those targets you evaluate each of those targets and determine which ones are shipwrecks, which ones aren't shipwrecks, and then developing that imagery. And then in the 4th phase we put divers in the water, and those divers go down and do the final high detailed visual and photographic documentation. So in the past we would do a project where we would have one of those phases but not the next, step in the process happening. So we would do an exploratory survey and find targets, but it might be, another year before we go back and image them in higher resolution, and then it might be another year after that before we can get the dive team put together and go do a dive on those, especially the deeper sites. So it just takes a lot of time, and the idea with the exploration and research grant was to get the partnerships all lined up, the technologies all lined up, and the people and the vessels all lined up so we do that within a single season.
And speaking of diving, you're a diver yourself.
Yes.
What do you guys actually experience on a dive?
Well, we experience a whole range of things depending on the conditions in the water, depending on what type of site we're diving. One of the things that really stands out the most when you're looking at a shipwreck underwater is the size of it. At the scale of these things, I mean, we see them on the surface of the water from really far away, and we know that they're large. We know that the size of them is something that is immense, but when you're actually up close underwater and you can see it, towering above you and going off in each direction as far as you can see, it's a pretty impressive sight. I mean, it's a very, very grand scale that we just don't really think about. How big these shipwrecks are, how intact they are, how much detail is left there with the preserved wood and metal. You see anchors, you see engines and machinery and boilers, you see the framing and how these vessels were put together. Within the sanctuary there's so many different types of vessels, from the sailing vessels, the motor vessels, the schooners, to the bulk freighters, and then smaller craft, barges, cranes, machinery, that type of thing. It's just kind of inspiring and really impressive when you're underwater. With the deeper dives that we do on the wrecks, you descend down through the water column and you don't really see anything, and then kind of out of the blue in front of you there just starts to materialize this large structure that is something that has been there for over 100 years and is just sitting sort of peacefully on the bottom.
Well, thank you, John, for your information and insights into exactly what a diver experiences and why we have so many phases. Coming up in part 2, we take a look at the underwater vehicle. Out here with Michigan Tech, and they've brought their underwater vehicle to tell us what they have discovered under Lake Huron. Come on, let's take a look. So I'm actually standing here with Guy Meadows of Michigan Tech, and I just wanted to know, what do you actually do?
I direct a new center at Michigan Tech that's devoted to Great Lakes research. It's called the Great Lakes Research Center. It's a beautiful waterfront facility. We have research vessels, survey vessels, and underwater vehicles like the one beside us here that we use throughout the Great Lakes, on all 5 of the Great Lakes.
Right, and talking about the underwater vehicle today, tell us a little bit about what that actually does and how it finds shipwrecks.
This is a fully autonomous underwater vehicle, which means we pre-program it and send it away on its own. No wires connecting it. It can go out for up to 8 hours at a time and survey as deep as 330 feet below the surface. We work with Michigan State Police to do recoveries of evidence, things like that. We do bottom mapping in various places, and our mission here with NOAA and the National Marine Sanctuary is to do very detailed looks with the advanced sensors on this vehicle of previously discovered shipwrecks and try to map those to archaeological standards. And we have some examples for you to look at in a little while.
Right, and if there are hundreds of shipwrecks in Lake Huron, what actually preserves those shipwrecks?
It's a number of things. That we have some advantages here in the Great Lakes that the ocean coasts don't have. One is our very cold water. that keeps the wrecks in almost pristine condition. We have a lack of underwater organisms that typically decay saltwater type of wrecks. So we're fortunate in a number of ways to have probably the world's best preserved shipwrecks.
And with preservation, what do you guys actually expect to find in this phase?
What we're doing is testing out some very new advanced technology to be able to map wrecks to archaeological standards. And some of the sensors on this particular vehicle are designed specifically to do that. And one of those sensors is up here in the nose of the vehicle, is this very high resolution side scan and mapping sonar. This is the latest generation and actually provides about 1 centimeter resolution across an entire wreck. So we can actually measure various parts of the wreck in its entirety, just like you were there on the bottom with a tape measure.
Have you guys actually found a shipwreck this journey?
What we're doing at this phase of the operation is looking at shipwrecks that have been known to the sanctuary and testing that our ability to make those measurements remotely without putting people underwater or putting them down deep where these wrecks reside, to be able to map them to the standards that archaeologists have previously mapped these wrecks. So we provide a very unique view of not only the ship and the detailed parts of the ship, but also the whole surrounding territory. So we're seeing artifacts on the bottom that are the result of things that have come off the ship in the process of its sinking, and mapping that debris field in addition to the wreck and the relation of the debris to the wreck itself, which sheds light on some of the mechanisms in which the wreck finally rested in the bottom.
What has been your greatest challenge? I know high winds come into play, just weather. What's some of your challenges you faced?
There's a number of challenges. This is a wonderful and very sophisticated vehicle, but we have a tremendous tech team here that program the vehicle and keep it running and keep it tuned up. So keeping the vehicle in top operating order is a challenge. The vehicle is able to go very deep. So again, protecting the inner workings of the vehicle, and this is jammed full. There's actually 3 computers inside this vehicle to take care of its navigation. We have a very close relationship with the sanctuary folks in terms of being able to get precise coordinates of where these wrecks are. The last thing we want to do is have this fully autonomous vehicle swim into the side of the ship or go into the ship and be lost to us. So it's probably one of the best answers to your question is once this submerges, once it dives, we no longer have any communication with the vehicle. So it just executes its predetermined program. So if we've made errors in that pre-programming of the vehicle, then they show up as very bad things on the bottom, and we don't want that to happen.
Well, can we take a little bit, let's take a little glance at the actual underwater vehicle, and can you explain to me what each part is into play?
Yeah. So the vehicle is electric powered, so it has lithium-ion batteries inside just like your computer does. So we charge the vehicle overnight. It has in the back propulsion, a propeller, very efficient shape to the vehicle, again because it's all about how you use that energy that's stored in the batteries. It has control fins to keep the vehicle exactly oriented the way we'd like it to be. In case we mess up, it has an acoustic pinger that will ping at a certain frequency underwater for up to a year for us to be able to get back to it and find it. We set the vehicle to be just slightly positively buoyant, so it just barely floats. And if it shuts itself down, has some sort of an internal failure, it'll very slowly rise to the surface. But when everything goes great, which is most of the time, It's a very sophisticated vehicle in how it's programmed and the ability it has to do things. And our real mission is to get up close and personal with these wrecks so that we can image them at very high resolution. When the vehicle is swimming on the surface, you'll notice it has red and green lights on either side. So it meets all the U.S. Coast Guard lighting requirements for a surface vessel. In this mast, there are a number of antennas. It is a Wi-Fi hotspot, so we can communicate with it with our computers when it's on the surface. It has GPS, so it knows exactly where it is on the surface. And it has a satellite communication link, so that if something happens and we have to leave it where it's at, we can actually drive it from our offices and have it come right back in here into the marina. When it finishes its mission, it goes to a park point, and it will stay there and wait for us to pick it up. And when the wind and the waves blows it away from the park point, it just motors back and parks again, and it'll do that until we get there to pick it up. Up in the nose, there is a forward-looking sonar that is collision avoidance. So if it senses the wreck on the bottom, it will pitch up and go over top of the wreck. If it was on the surface and was coming at the side of our ship, it would dive down and go under the ship all on its own. The main sensor is this side scan sonar. There's one lens on each side here that do very precise acoustic imaging. So that's just like you'd see in a hospital with an ultrasound, but a very big ultrasound of a big part of the bottom of the lake. We also have a still and video camera and a strobe light so that we can get actual digital photographic images of the vehicle. While we got it turned upside down here, this is one of our most important sensors. It's called a Doppler velocity log, and that is a sensor that measures the flow of water below the vehicle. So it measures the vector of the water flow that the vehicle is swimming through.
Okay.
But most importantly, it determines its true heading relative to the bottom from the acoustic reflection off the bottom. So if I'm trying to swim from me to you and there's a big strong current and I'm kind of getting pushed sideways, it will sense that and correct the navigation. Because once we leave the surface, there's no GPS underwater, and to do this very precise stuff, we need to know exactly where we are. And that's the sum total of the sensors on board the vehicle. As I say, there's a dual-core processor devoted to navigating the vehicle underwater as precisely as possible. There's a processor that runs this very advanced sonar system, and then there's a third processor that is called the backseat driver that lets us take control of the vehicle and do magical things with like being able to use the sonar sensor to lock on the side of a ship and then follow that precisely and things like that. So very, very advanced vehicle. This is a commercially available vehicle. It's made by a company called Ocean Server out of Falls River, Massachusetts. And this is a very advanced sonar made by a company called EdgeTech. And we've combined the best available vehicle with the best available sonar, and we're getting some fantastic results out here in
Lake Huron.
And this is a wonderful place to have to work.
Well, thanks guys so much for teaching me what an underwater vehicle does. And in part 3, we're going to learn just what Phase 4 is all about. Welcome back to Insights. It's been a long journey on Phase 3. Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary have been out in the waters on their research. But did they actually find something? Let's take a look. So John, what is your plan for Phase 4?
Well, Phase 4 of this project is the diving component. So in Phase 3, we're going to collect this high-resolution acoustic imagery over these sites. So we get these kind of side scan data files that come off of it. We're also going to have 3D point cloud models that will be generated from the bathymetry sonar. Those 3D models are then going to be compared to a similar type of modeling program that we use where divers collect images. We take a bunch of photographs around the site and then we mosaic them into a single 3D photogrammetric model. That 3D photo model is similar in the sense to the acoustic model in that they're both three-dimensional, but one is derived from sound and the other is derived from imagery. So we want to compare what we have collected on these sites with the sound-based models to what the divers collect with the photo-based models and see where we're different kinds of detail, different types of structure and measurements that we can take as a better way of understanding how these quick, rapid, remote sensing surveys characterize a site versus putting divers and observers in the water to do the same thing and have a better understanding of the relationship of the remote technologies that are being deployed throughout the project to the more traditional or sort of diver manned systems that we've used in the past.
Now, where do you see research going in the next 10 years with the sanctuary?
Well, research is going to continue to characterize shipwrecks, especially within the expanded areas of the sanctuary. But as these technologies become more and more accessible to us and we maintain partnerships with the agencies or universities or groups that are experts in these technologies, hopefully we'll be able to continue incorporating these things or incorporating new, more higher resolution, more powerful systems. And it seems like the trend is for sonars, whether it's batteries, lights, diving technology, automated systems, things become smaller, more accessible, more higher resolution, more powerful at capturing imagery. So as the technology itself continues to progress into the future, then hopefully the sanctuary is going to be able to continue to leverage these kinds of partnerships that bring Michigan Tech or bring the University of Delaware or East Carolina University, continuing to work with Alpena Community College with the technologies they have and apply them to our mission to document the shipwrecks within the sanctuary. So we see an exciting future because as archaeologists, we're getting more and more tools in our toolbox. We used to have to get in the water with tape measurers and underwater writing paper and do all this by hand, and not that that's still not important, but as these technologies become more prolific throughout various industry sectors, hopefully we'll be able to benefit from that as well.
And speaking of exciting, have you found anything else interesting in the lakes?
So if you look at a nautical chart of Lake Huron, there's the areas that are shallow and they're blue, and there's the areas that are deep and they're in white, and there's little soundings throughout that tell you what the approximate depth is, but it's not very high resolution data. And when we start scanning areas of the lake floor, or anybody that's doing bottom mapping here sees a much greater level of detail, much more dynamic features along the lake floor than what is captured in your sort of traditional map of the lake. So any area that we look, we see all kinds of different types of bottom types, changes in depth. We've found sinkholes that are out in the lake, areas of highly variable bottom material, so things that could be, habitat for fish, areas of highly variable depths and bathymetry, so where you look at the chart and you think it's just this uniform, flat lake bottom, it's actually not really the case. So every area that we go and look in the detail that we're looking, sub-meter resolution, is really interesting because the bottom is so interesting and it's just not represented well in, a big blown-up nautical chart.
Now, I've actually toured the shipwrecks, and as a tourist, what do you think they have to gain going over the sanctuary, our very own sanctuary?
The shipwrecks here provide anyone that comes to visit with a very unique and exciting experience. You're literally connecting with hundreds of years of history through the remains of these vessels that are so well preserved in the cold freshwater. So from sailing schooners to steam engines, from vessels that are carrying all these different kinds of cargoes, hundreds of years of history of economic activity, of development and commerce and exploration in the lakes. You're physically connecting with that when you see the remains of this stuff on the bottom. And think of how many places in the world can you go and find intact shipwrecks in clear freshwater that you can take a boat ride out and drive right over and have somebody on board that's going to explain the history of those vessels and how they relate to the local area, to the region, and to more national level, and the significance of those vessels, and just the kind of really cool visual factor. You're seeing the lake floor, you're seeing steam engines and wood and iron and all that material on the bottom. So it's a really exciting and fun experience in coming to visit that, whether getting on the glass bottom boat or actually getting in the water yourself, going out to some of the sites that you can kayak to, you can snorkel to. If you're a certified diver, you can get on a charter boat and go out and see even more of those that are in a little deeper water. So it's a really, really fun and a really neat way to connect with history it's hard to do elsewhere and extremely unique and I think very much worth the time to come up here and do it.
Do you think technology could replace a diver's job?
I think technology augments what divers do. I mentioned previously that we used to have to go in with measuring tapes and capture this stuff by drawing it. The technology enhances what archaeologists can research and study because we can look at more areas, we can look at them quicker, we can capture that structural information in a way that is, requires some interpretation, so you still have a human element to that interpretation, but at the same time, we can look at more sites more quickly, and we see the technology as tools in a toolbox. There still needs to be observers in the water. It's hard to replace the perspective of the human eye and your ability to see details, to change and shift your perspective as you're moving around a site versus some of these more remote technologies. You have to program them. They see things from a single perspective or multiple perspectives depending on how they've been set up. And it's a valuable contribution, but ultimately it's the collection of everything, whether it's remotely sensed technology or people observers, telepresence with ROVs, capturing that imagery and then assimilating all of it into a meaningful product that makes a better interpretation of the site. So we welcome the technology. That's why we're doing this project, is we want to see how these various tools can work together to help us complete our mission with documenting shipwrecks here.
So John, what's your takeaway?
What's my takeaway from this project? Oh man, I think that the biggest takeaway is the value of partnerships. The sanctuary has this amazing resource throughout the lake. We have research vessels, we have people that are dedicated to documenting and monitoring, preserving this, but it's really those partnerships with Alpena Community College, with the partners of this project that are here, the University of Delaware, Oceans Unmanned, Michigan Tech, that bring experts, that bring tools in and help us understand these technologies, help us do the work that we're here to do. So it's the collaborative nature of this research that I think is the most important part, and it's been proven time and time again over the years with all the research that's been done here at Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary, is that you get the best results, you get the most productive effort when you're working collaboratively with other groups, other experts, their systems, their technology, integrating with our systems and our technology and applying those as productively and efficiently as we can.
We hope that taking a look into the deeper waters of Lake Huron helped you understand just what our precious history is about. For Insights, I'm your host, Star Connor.
Insights into Northeast Michigan is produced by WBKB News. If you have any comments, suggestions, or topics you would like to see on a future show, please email WBKB News. This has been a production of Thunder Bay Broadcasting Corporation. All rights reserved.